Welcome to the American Association of Critical Care Nurses Voices in Nursing podcast, exploring critical care nursing through meaningful and inspiring conversations. This episode is sponsored by AACN's online course, Fundamental Skills for Preceptors, with information available at www.aacn.org/preceptor skills. Now, here are your hosts, AACN's Chief Clinical Officer, Dr. Vicki Good, and Clinical Practice Specialist, Andrea Schmitt.
Welcome to the Voices in Nursing podcast. This is Dr. Vicki Good, AACN's Chief Clinical Officer, and I am joined by my fellow host, Andrea Schmitt, one of our Clinical Practice Specialists.
Hi, this is Andrea. Welcome to today's podcast.
Today, we have the privilege of speaking with two authentic leaders. We want to welcome Allison Steuber and Ryan Miller from Christiana Care in Newark, Delaware. We are going to discuss with them how they have embraced authentic leadership for all of their team. One of my passions throughout my career has been ensuring my practice is aligned with being an authentic leader. Throughout my career, I have experienced many authentic leaders and a few that were so much authentic. Those authentic leaders made lasting impressions on my career. Andrea, do you recall any special leaders in your career and what impact did they have on you?
Absolutely, Vicki. The leaders that impacted me the most, I think, really had all of the attributes of authentic leadership in every interaction. They were really positive role models that lifted up the department they served through recognition, seeing potential in staff, mentoring, and then helping them grow professionally. That's who I wanted to be, basically.
I agree. That was always my thing that I strived for. Well, today we have the privilege of speaking with two authentic leaders. We want to welcome Allison Steuber and Ryan Miller from Christiana Care in Newark, Delaware. We are going to talk to them about how they've really embraced authentic leadership for every generation. So let's start with a few introductions. Allison, would you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Hi, good afternoon. I am the nurse manager for the cardiovascular critical care complex at Christiana Care in Newark, Delaware. We are a 26-bed ICU where we care for patients who are coming in for a multitude of cardiac reasons, including cardiac surgery. I have been a nurse since 2007. All of my career has been at Christiana, and I have really enjoyed my journey into nursing leadership over the last 10 years, getting to lead a remarkable team of incredibly talented nurses. So I started my career out in the emergency department, transitioned for a few years into the perioperative space, and have been in the ICU since 2020.
And Ryan, how about yourself?
My name is Ryan Miller. I'm the assistant nurse manager in the cardiovascular critical care complex. I actually started my nursing career on this unit back in 2011. So I've spent my entire nursing career on 2E. It's our alternative name. I have been a clinical nurse there. I went up the clinical ladder, was a clinical expert, and then I transitioned to the assistant nurse manager role back in 2016.
And I know both of you describe yourself as an authentic leader, but how would you describe that style?
You know, we get asked this question often, and I feel like the best answer is honest and real. Just being true to your word and being honest when you don't know the answer to questions or what the future may hold, as you know, healthcare is ever changing. Just being true to your team and answering questions to the best of your ability and letting them know when you're really not sure.
Exactly. I think connection and communication are two of the most important things that we as a leadership team do on our unit. Having been on the unit since 2011, Allison came back in 2020 during a really challenging time where communication was of utmost importance. And as a nursing leader, I've grown tremendously with her mentorship And really, I think we've worked together to develop a very strong relationship with our nursing team. And that is really what enables us to be successful.
And as you describe that, the word that comes to my mind is integrity. Just leading a life of integrity through the lens of a leader. So, Andrea, I want to turn it over to you.
Yeah, definitely. Ryan, coming from a staff nurse into a management position can be challenging. But you felt that it was really important for leaders to see each nurse on the unit as an individual. So, how do you ensure that that individuality is recognized, and how do you do it in a way that's meaningful to them?
I mean, I think the biggest thing that we do as a leadership team is really try to develop a connection with each individual. We really want to get to know them. We want to know what's going on at home, because one of the biggest things that we talk about in our check-ins is that we have a life outside of work, right? Mm-hmm. So there's stressors that are happening outside of work that, come into work, whether we want them to or not. So we want to really recognize that and really, understand that each person's coming to work with different challenges. Getting to know them personally, know their families, know what's going on, I think is something that's really important.
Yeah, I think not assuming that we know the answer, not assuming that we know how they would like to be recognized or what's most important to them, and really taking the time to ask those questions and then to store that in some fashion, whether it's in a written way or in a database or just in your head, knowing little details about each individual that can really make a difference in the way that you interact with them. And that, I think, is one of the most important things to make sure that you're really reaching them where it's most meaningful.
I really like what you said about, realizing that there's a life outside of work and how you carry something with you no matter what. You may not want to, but it happens, right? And the fact that you have an understanding of what's going on with each staff member, I think that's really great, and being able to support them if they should need it, because we know it can impact their shift, right? I think that's great. Thank you for doing that for your staff.
And Allison, you started to touch on this, but meaningful recognition is one of the standards of our healthy work environment standards, as you well know. And it's really one of the aspects of being an authentic leader is being able to meaningfully recognize your staff. So how can you tell us about a time when you had success really individualizing the meaningful recognition, and how did your staff respond to that?
Yeah, so one of the things we did a couple years ago is during our quarterly check-ins with each of our individual staff members, we asked them how they like to be recognized. So we have a lot of different means of recognition at our organization. And we've identified that some of our nurses don't care for public recognition. They're very private. And so we talked about, how can we provide recognition in a way that's meaningful, that will be well received by each individual. When we have new caregivers come onto our team, we sit down and ask them what is their preferred means of recognition. And then we store that in a little database that we have. So recently we had a nurse who was nominated for a Daisy Award. And when I went to give her that recognition, I went into our database to look up how she preferred to be recognized. And her preferred recognition was a handwritten note. Now, this was a new nurse resident who I don't even know that she was off orientation at the time, nearing the end of her orientation. And I sent her a handwritten note with a copy of the Daisy nomination to her home. And she received it, and she came in a few days later and had the biggest smile on her face and proceeded to tell me how much it had meant to her. Her mom is also a nurse that works here at Christiana Care. And she said, I opened it with my mom and we got to read the feedback from this patient. And it was just so meaningful to me to be able to share that moment with my mom and for her to see what an impact I'm making as a nurse following in her footsteps. So I think that's just one example of really meeting that individual where it's most meaningful for them, where sharing it on the unit with all of her peers may not have been as meaningful as it was for her to have that moment with her mom at home.
Well, it's so incredible that, in today's day and age of electronic stuff, that you still take that time to do those individual notes. And, speaking from my experience in my 30 plus year, nursing career, I have a file of handwritten notes that I've received. And when I'm having a tough day, I get that file out and read it. So I can speak to the power that has for individuals.
So I wanted to kind of circle back for a moment when we talk about, part of authentic leaders is growing someone professionally. And so we know that being a leader, it's not limited to the manager, right? So Allison and Ryan, how do you two empower your staff to be leaders or take on that role and kind of help them grow professionally?
I would say one of the biggest things is just empowering our nurses to, use their bold voice, specifically when we're talking about being in charge. A lot of our nurses really grow into that leadership role when they're in the charge nurse role. And just within the past few years, we've had a number of nurses who have advanced the clinical ladder and grown. And I feel like a lot of that is due to just ongoing support, ongoing collaboration, and really keeping channels of communication open, and really just supporting them with what their goals are, and having the ability to bring them to the table when it's something that they're really passionate about. So like understanding, like if someone's really interested in pressure injury prevention, or someone's very interested in cardioclapsy prevention, making sure you're setting them up for success and getting them involved in projects and things that interest them.
And I think, part of that professional development is also not expecting that everybody is looking to advance. And so understanding where each individual is at in their career, maybe they have a lot going on outside of here. Maybe they're just coming into motherhood and being a mom is most important to them right now. Just reassuring them that that is just as much okay as it is to be super involved here at work. And you can still come to work every day and be an exceptional nurse, giving the best care to your patients without taking on those additional responsibilities. And then you often will see that those nurses, as they come out of those different phases of their life, come out a little bit more invigorated and ready to then take on that next step, because you've given them the permission to be okay with whatever phase that they're in. And I think we see that a lot with some of our, nurses as they grow in their career. They get married, they start to have kids, and then they kind of come out and are looking to redefine their own selves as a critical care nurse and getting more engaged. And we've seen a tremendous amount of growth within our own unit over the past couple of years. And it's really exciting to see them take these ideas that they have. And I always tell them, find the thing that is most obnoxious to you, or that you think has the biggest opportunity that just plucks every nerve you have, and focus on that. How can we make that better? It doesn't have to be what my priority is. It's what would make your job easier. What would improve the care of our patients? Because you see it every day and you're going to bring the greatest amount of ideas.
And I think one thing Allison touched on is keeping a pulse on what those individuals need, right? Yeah. And really talking with them and understanding where they are and what their goals are, and, making sure we're supporting them.
I think what a great strategy, and embracing somebody where they're at the time is fabulous, instead of putting pressure on them to participate if they're not able to. So that's great.
So I want to flip us a little bit to more of a controversial subject, and that's on conflict and how do you handle conflict. And we know, based on, some of the research, and it's of course a stereotype, but most people in the younger generations don't like to deal with conflict, and don't like to confront, in times of conflict. You all work in the CT ICU or cardiovascular ICU, whatever everybody calls those different units. And I've never known a shy CT surgeon. They're always pretty confident in what they need, and we want them to be a confident surgeon. So how do you foster that true collaboration between the CT surgeons and your nursing staff when there is times of conflict that need to be confronted?
I think it depends on the situation. We really try to empower the nurses to manage the conflict themselves. And we offer them a lot of support in situations where they may not feel comfortable doing that independently. So we may do like a role play to practice how that conversation might look before they go to sit down and have the conversation with the individual. Sometimes it's, with the example that you give of the surgeon, sometimes that means that we are in multidisciplinary rounds with them to help facilitate that conversation. But I will say that I think our nurses are using the skills that they have and really leaning on that effective communication and having those conversations. And the surgeons are all the physicians, to be honest, are very receptive of that. It's a very collaborative relationship because I think they're able to see the value that each member brings to the team. And I think the nurses deserve a lot of credit for that in using their voices to respectfully and professionally share their knowledge and their ideas so that it can be a two-way collaborative conversation.
Well, and I would say, that is totally because of your authentic leadership, that they have that confidence and they feel that empowerment to do that.
Yeah, I think to lean into that a little bit, and we touched on it earlier, Ryan was talking about the charge nurses. It's really about making the nurses, whether it's the clinical nurse at the bedside or the charge nurse, believe in themselves and to believe that they have the power to make the right decision. And we often tell them, as long as you keep the patient at the center, you will always make the right decision. Mm-hmm. Focus on the patient, do what's right for the patient, and you really can't go wrong. And if sometimes there's many different ways to do something. If you make the wrong choice, we can talk about that after, but we truly believe in their ability to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. And I can't really say that there's been a time we have to sit down and have a conversation after, because they have the knowledge and the skills to do that. You just have to let them.
And building that trust and empowerment, I think, was really key when Allison first came to our unit back in 2020, because we really were passing along information and communicating with everyone in real time. And we were able to really build that strong bond, I think, with the team to trust.
Is there ever a time where there's a really challenging situation, though, where a nurse maybe, even with all the empowerment, really struggles to communicate or, dare I say, stand up for themselves? How do you manage that?
So I think there's a couple different examples of that. So one, we had a more novice nurse who was on orientation, and at the end of our orientation for CV surgery recovery, our nurse was shadow in the operating room. And this nurse was, obviously terrified to be in the operating room, gowned up, masked up, watching open heart surgery for the first time ever. And the surgeon started drilling her, asking her all these pathophysiology questions, and she felt very uncomfortable because she was already nervous, and she wasn't expecting to be answering questions. She was there to observe the procedure. And she came to us and shared this feedback, and I was mortified for her because I knew I know when I go into the operating room, I'm just trying not to touch the wrong thing and contaminate anything or lean over too far and fall into the patient's chest cavity. So I knew she was nervous. And so I pulled the surgeon aside and we had a conversation, and it was interesting to hear from his perspective. He's like, well, this is very important information, and I was just trying to understand her knowledge base. And I said, I respect that, but that's what we're doing with nursing orientation. That is not the optimal learning opportunity for her. And it kind of puts her on the spot because they're not expecting to be having those conversations when they're shadowing in the OR. So I think that's one example. And, we've seen too sometimes with different generations. So I'll use the example of a Generation Z nurse taking over for a baby boomer. And so the baby boomer nurse is much more direct. They come from a different time where if I take over for you and I see things that you missed, I'm going to let you know. And it's not because I'm being critical, it's because we have standards of care and I expect these things to be done. And if I don't tell you that you missed these things, then you might not have a chance to do that the next time because it probably was just an honest mistake and you didn't realize it had to be done or were never taught. And oftentimes we'll see some of our Generation Z nurses get very defensive when they're given that feedback, even though it's not being given with ill intent. And so we've had to facilitate some of these conversations with nurses from different generations to just have a better understanding of each other and where the intent is coming from and understanding, for the baby boomer nurse, you have to soften the message a little bit when you're talking to a Generation Z nurse. And so being able to deliver that feedback in a different manner so that the Generation Z nurse can receive it, and then helping the Generation Z nurse understand that that baby boomer nurse is not criticizing you. They're only trying to help you grow and be a better nurse because they know that you're capable of that. And so I think those are kind of opportunities to kind of bring, different perspectives into it and to help support them through those difficult conflicts.
Thank you for that explanation. Ryan, so I know oftentimes CVICU is a stepping stone for nurses who are wanting to go on to advanced practice, and in particular, CRNAs. So knowing that these nurses may only stay around for a limited amount of time, how have you embraced this and built a leadership strategy around it?
I think the biggest thing to remember is everyone has something to offer our team. And when you look at it from that perspective, the possibilities are endless. And we really want to engage everyone, like I said, understand where they're coming from, know their goals, and support them with that. If they want to go on to anesthesia school, what can I do as a nurse leader to support you in reaching that goal? I know that's something that we talk about all the time, being aware of what our team members want and trying to set them up for success.
And we also, when we first started working as a team, we have our staff interview all of our candidates for our positions. And it was interesting. They would interview someone and we would say, okay, what did you think? And they would tell us, oh, well, they just want to go to CRNA school. So they would kind of write them off. And so we had to help them reframe because from their mind, it's like, why are we going to bring them in and orient them for them to just leave in a few years? And so we had to help them reframe, but they could be an excellent nurse while they're here. And you're going to help prepare them to be an even greater CRNA. And they're going to be the ones caring for our patients in the operating room. So whether they're working here with us or in another capacity as a CRNA, we still have an opportunity to turn out incredible nurses that can give great patient care, no matter where that is. And I think, like Ryan said, it's the nature of the beast. We're going to have nurses that come and go because we are the highest, hot ticket for CRNA school. And that's okay. But while they're here, we want to really capitalize on everything that they can offer the team and the patients.
How do you lead them into making meaningful contributions to the unit if they're able to, while they're there with their schooling, et cetera?
I would say just getting involved in any of our unit activities. We have what we call value improvement teams, which are basically our harm reduction or harm prevention teams on our unit. So we don't make it mandatory for everyone to do that, but we encourage people to join as a way to get involved in the unit. And that's a great opportunity for them to begin to build their resume. These are all things that we would help support them through, in addition to shadowing opportunities, linking them up with mentors in the operating room, because ultimately, like Allison said, these CRNAs are going to be bringing our patients out to our unit, and our nurses will already have that collaborative relationship.
I think the other thing we use is, reminding them, if you have aspirations to move to other roles, how are you going to set yourself apart from the other candidates? So if you're here and you're being a nurse, and that's great, you're giving great patient care, but if you want to move into a position, say a nurse educator role, how are you going to set yourself apart from all of those other candidates? And so that's where you want to show that you're involved and you've led initiatives or been involved in different teams to make a difference that will set you up to be the best candidate to get that next position.
The two of you have talked a little bit about this earlier and even in this question, but I think one of the joys and the challenges of being a nurse leader is the fact that every staff member is at a different place in their life. Some of them are, new moms, through some of the older generation nurses. And due to that, they each have different abilities to contribute to the unit. So some can, get highly engaged in professional development outside of work, and some can't because of other obligations. But you both seem to have a knack of meeting the staff where they're at and getting them engaged in the unit one way or the other. So how have you been able to achieve that in your career?
Good question.
I mean, I think not pressuring anyone to do anything has been probably one of the most successful tactics. And I think leading by example, when nurses see other nurses, taking a lead and, bringing a new initiative to our unit, making a change that really impacts the patients, everyone kind of wants to get on board. Kind of role modeling those positive behaviors, I think, is what is the most impactful at getting people to be engaged. And I do think a lot of our more novice nurses have an interest in getting engaged because they are really driven by their professional goals. So, I mean, we've been pretty fortunate in having a really great group of nurses who really want to, be the best that they can be and provide the best care to the patients that we serve every day. So again, it's not every nurse, but I think the vast majority of our team is very, very engaged and, wants to take the lead.
And using their strengths. So to your point, they might not be able to give by the means of time and leading initiatives, but recognizing you have a lot of nursing experience or life experience, and you can help to grow nurses in a different way by mentoring them, helping them to have those difficult conversations. I can think of some of our night shift charge nurses that are really good on that off shift when there's not as much presence, being able to help the bedside nurse that might be more novice advocate for their patient with, if they're experiencing pushback, and to really help them to learn to have some of those difficult conversations when you know that it's the right thing for the patient. So I think those are ways, and I think we try our best to remind them, because, some of them are like, well, I don't do all the committees and I'm not involved in all the things. It's like, that's okay. You bring a lot to our team in so many other ways, and we appreciate that because not everybody has that ability.
And we also try to have those conversations, obviously, about goals in their quarterly check-ins. So we meet with our team members quarterly, and just kind of being aware of when maybe a more novice nurse says, hey, I'm feeling more comfortable in the unit. I feel like I've gotten a good amount of experience and I'm ready now to maybe try to, get in more involved in a committee. And then if we can be aware of, when we need a super user for a new technology that's coming and maybe tapping that nurse, we talk about meaningful recognition. And I think that just connecting those dots and saying, I know that there's someone, I keep you in the back of my mind when there's a new technology that comes, that nurse is ready, and tapping them and saying, I remember a few months ago, we had this conversation, we could use someone as a super user. And I think that is a small piece of meaningful recognition that the team appreciates.
I think that your authenticity as leaders is just exuding off of you. I absolutely love it. It's fantastic. Makes me want to work there.
Come on
but-
down.
Well, I'd have to move, but thank you for the offer.
We may be able to find something virtual. You never know. We got to think creatively these days.
So either one of you can answer this, but I think we all inherently know that no matter what your role is on the unit, open and honest communication is really the key to all healthy relationships. But I think in healthcare, it's really especially important to have two-way communication. So with obviously multiple shifts, how do you ensure that communication reaches all the shifts, that the staff feel up to date, but also have the opportunity to have their voice heard? And then how do you know that it's working? How do you evaluate its effectiveness?
I would say our team does a really great job of just trying to connect with all of our team members across all the different shifts, and really just being present. We have huddles in the morning that we do. A lot of communication is passed, especially from our clinical nurse specialists, with outcomes, and then from the nursing leadership team, if there's changes or new initiatives or information that needs to be shared, there's opportunities right then and there to have that communication. But I really feel like our presence out in the unit on a day-to-day basis allows for that. The communication just happens in real time.
Yeah, I think we try to be as transparent as possible. So, and really try to arrange our schedules so that there is that cross coverage. So I make it a point, I have a lot of meetings typically during the day, so it's more difficult for me to be on the unit late at night. So I tend to be here first thing in the morning. So I see night shift every day. And so I'm here first thing in the morning. We're at our huddle, which is where our day shift and night shift both come together. And then, I typically will do a lap around the unit, like Ryan said, having that presence. So, we're monitoring that we're completing our bedside shift report and checking on any patients that we were concerned about overnight. But it also gives a chance for the staff to see us and to be able to say, hey, when I'm done report, can I check in with you real quick? And so then after I do my lap, I tend to go in my office, and, there are days that there's like a line of people waiting, just with, random things, or they just want to say hi. But they know that that's kind of consistent. I keep my schedule on the door so they can see where I'm at all day long. My meetings aren't a secret. So they can see where I'm at and know if they pop by and I'm not in the office and there's nothing on my calendar, I'm probably out on the unit somewhere and they can find me. So I think just trying to be transparent in that way. And then as far as measuring effectiveness, we ask pointed questions during some of our check-ins throughout the year to ask, what are we doing that is most helpful, or what is one thing you need us to stop doing? When there's ever communication that needs to go out, big changes, we don't just send a blast email. We will walk the unit and hit every individual person. Word spreads very fast around here. So if it's something organizationally, if we don't get the message out quickly, they'll hear it from someone in another area. So we typically will walk the unit individually, share the information with each caregiver, which I think helps to, clear up answer any questions or understand any misperceptions before things get blown out of proportion, and kind of get ahead of those things. And then we send out email communication so that anyone who's not working on the unit that day would be able to receive the same information. So it doesn't kind of get passed down word of mouth. Like Ryan said, we share those at our huddle. So if it's big things, we'll share it again at our night shift huddle. So that anyone coming in, and then make sure that someone's here for the next morning huddle to also share that information there. So really just trying to be as intentional and in person with that information as close to the time it's communicated as possible.
So as I reflect on our conversation, we really have focused on authentic leadership. But as I think about all of the healthy work environment standards, you both exemplify all of those standards in your practice. And so I just want to thank you for that. We need more leaders like the two of you. And I hope that, this podcast will give some pointers and some hope to, some of our listeners as they listen. So I want to just thank the two of you for spending some time with us. I know your time is very precious. And we just want to thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Well, we appreciate it. And we also want to thank our listeners for joining us. And as a reminder, we would love your feedback on this episode and any ideas for future episodes. You can contact us at podcasts@aacn.org.
Thank you for listening to the American Association of Critical Care Nurses Voices in Nursing podcast, proudly sponsored by AACN's online course, Fundamental Skills for Preceptors, with information available at www.aacn.org/preceptor skills.